Have you ever felt a weight inside you that should not be there? Something that is not physical, not material, not external, yet it presses on your soul like an invisible stone. A weight that shows up in silence. A weight that appears when you try to pray. A weight that reveals itself when you try to seek God. A weight you cannot explain, but you feel it every single day. Dallas Willard understood this kind of weight like few others. He once said a sentence that carries a powerful revelation about the spiritual life. The soul is not freed from a burden by force, but by the presence that transforms it. This is one of the greatest secrets of the inner life, a secret that almost no one understands. And that is why so many live tired, exhausted, spiritually trapped. Most people try to fix the soul by force, by the force of discipline, by the force of routine, by the force of will, by the force of promises, by the force of "this time I will," by the force of their own mind. But the soul does not work like that. The soul is not tamed by force. It is shaped by presence, and maybe you are suffering precisely because you tried to be too strong. Maybe you tried to push your soul with brutality. I will change. I will stop. I will get better. I will fix myself. I will overcome this. I will fix my spiritual life. But every time you tried to do it on your own, the weight increased. Have you noticed that? When you try to solve it by force, you get worse spiritually, you wear down mentally, you sink emotionally, you become deeply frustrated because you are trying to heal the soul with tools that never had the power to heal it. Dallas Willard said that the soul was created to be transformed only by what it contemplates. And when it contemplates the presence of God, it changes, it breathes, it reorganizes, it realigns, it releases burdens that once seemed impossible to release. But when it contemplates only its own strength, it locks up. That is why so many people are trapped in cycles. That is why so many fall into the same mistakes. That is why so many Christians live exhausted. That is why so many leaders die on the inside while serving on the outside. That is why so many young Christians are weary, anxious, and without hope. They are not necessarily sinning. They are fighting with the wrong strength. And maybe you are living this too. Trying to overcome by force what can only be overcome by presence, trying to heal trauma by force, trying to silence temptation by force, trying to break habits by force, trying to fix emotions by force, trying to restore your spirituality by force. But force will never be enough. It never was. It never will be. Dallas Willard said that human strength is limited, because the soul is too deep to be shaped by inner muscles. The soul only releases its burdens when it encounters something greater than them. And that something greater is the presence of God. Maybe that is why you are feeling this message touch you so deeply right now. God is showing you that you do not need to be strong. You need to be shaped. You do not need to prove anything to God. You do not need to perform. You do not need to force your soul to become what it cannot be on its own. You were never meant to carry everything alone. You only need to expose yourself to the one who transforms. Presence heals where force wounds. Presence brings order where force confuses. Presence restores where force breaks. Presence organizes where force creates chaos. Presence illuminates where force blinds. And maybe you have tried to fight your spiritual battles like someone who is drowning, desperately trying to swim, when all you needed to do was stop struggling and trust. Willard said that we do not become spiritual by trying, but by surrendering. And that surrender begins by accepting a simple truth. I cannot do it alone, and you were never meant to. You were created to be transformed by presence, not by effort. And maybe this is the moment in your life when God is calling you to stop pushing your soul by force and begin to let it rest in Him. Because there are burdens that do not leave by force. They melt in the presence, just like ice under the sun. It does not break, it dissolves. You do not need to break your soul. Let the presence of God dissolve the weight you are carrying. Perhaps right now you are carrying an emotional burden you hide, a burden of guilt, a burden of anxiety, a burden of silent sorrow, a burden of old wounds, a spiritual burden of coldness, a burden of distraction, a burden of feeling that God is far away. But it is not force that will remove this. It is presence. Dallas Willard said, "The most powerful place of the Christian is not where he fights. It is where he surrenders." Do you know why? Because when you fight, you depend on yourself. But when you surrender, you open yourself to transformation. The presence of God does not require strength. It requires openness. It requires sincerity. It requires exposure. It requires silence. It requires rest. And perhaps this is the word you need most right now: rest. Stop trying to be strong. Stop trying to fix everything alone. Stop trying to understand everything. Stop trying to control your own heart. Stop trying to fix your soul with brute force. Come into the presence, because the presence does what effort never could. It heals, it shapes, it restores, it rebuilds, it renews, it restructures, it purifies, it draws near. And maybe you are realizing this right now, a sense that this is not just another message. Something in it is calling you. Something in it exposes you. Something in it draws you in. Something in it embraces you. Something in it awakens you. This is the presence of God beginning to touch you. Even before you pray, breathe deeply. Let us continue this journey. Have you noticed that there are pains you try to explain, but you cannot find the words? You try to describe them to someone, but nothing seems to fit. It is not sadness. It is not anger. It is not anxiety. It is not confusion. It is something deeper, something that lives where names do not exist. Dallas Willard called this the inner burden, a burden that does not appear on medical exams, that is not detected by specialists, that friends do not understand, that techniques cannot solve, that productivity cannot treat. A burden that only God sees and that only God can reach. And maybe you have carried this burden for years, a burden you learned to push, to live with, to hide, a burden you mask with routine, humor, work, public spirituality. But the truth is that this burden touches your soul deeply, and you know it. Dallas Willard said there are pains that exist only because the soul tried to survive without God, not out of rebellion, but out of lack of presence. The soul suffers when it tries to live far from the source. Just as the lungs need air, the soul needs God. And everything you try to hold on to by yourself begins to crush you. That is why you feel tired, even when you sleep well. That is why you feel anxious, even without a clear reason. That is why you feel a silent sadness, even when everything seems stable. That is why you feel a strange emptiness, even with people around you. The weight of the soul does not come from outside. It comes from within. It comes from an absence. Dallas Willard said the soul hurts when it loses presence, not when it loses strength. You are not weak, you are distant, and distance always weighs. The soul that stays too far from the place where it is transformed begins to grow sick. You notice it in the subtleties. Your laughter loses its spontaneity. Your prayer loses its depth. Your faith loses its brightness. Your mind loses its lightness, your conscience loses its sensitivity, your spirit loses its strength, your inner life loses its voice. And this is not spiritual failure, this is lack of presence. Dallas Willard often said something striking: the presence of God is not an event, it is a habitat. You do not visit the presence, you inhabit it, you live in it, you breathe in it. But when modern life tears you away from this habitat, when busyness scatters you, when distractions replace silence, when worries replace surrender, when your mind becomes too full, when your soul becomes too hurried, the presence becomes the exception, and the burden becomes the rule. Maybe that is why you feel as if you are carrying everything alone, as if your soul is tired in a way your body cannot explain, as if there is an invisible pressure, a nameless anguish, a restlessness without rest. Dallas Willard said the soul is never too heavy. It is only overloaded with things it was never meant to carry, and you know that you are carrying things you should not. People you try to save, pains you cannot release, expectations you try to fulfill, guilt you cannot let go of, wounds you cannot heal, anxieties you try to control, memories you try to erase, emotional battles you try to fight alone. And the more you try to carry all of this by force, the heavier it becomes.